The storm had been building all afternoon, a slow and angry rumble that rolled over the valley like the growl of something ancient and waiting. The sky was a heavy, shifting gray, and the wind carried the scent of rain and earth. 12-year-old Eli trudged along the narrow forest path, his small arms aching under the weight of the firewood bundle strapped to his back. Each step sank slightly into the damp soil, and his thin boots, patched more times than he could remember, let in the cold with every squelch. He was used to the ache, though. Hunger, cold, and loneliness were as familiar to him as the air he breathed. They were the only companions he had left. He paused at the crest of a hill where the path sloped down toward the river. From there he could see his tiny cabin on the opposite side, a crooked little thing of logs and mud, half swallowed by weeds. It wasn't much, but it was home, or at least the closest thing he had to one. He sighed and hitched the bundle higher on his shoulders, his breath misting in the chill. The sky was darkening fast. He knew he needed to hurry before the storm broke. Then, over the moan of the wind, he heard something, faint at first, like a voice carried by the current. He stopped, listening. Again it came, a cry, weak, strained, and desperate. Eli frowned and looked down the slope toward the river. The water had already begun to swell from the rain that had been falling higher up the mountain. He could see the current swirling fast, carrying branches and foam. And there, across the river on the opposite bank, was a figure. Eli squinted through the mist and rain. The figure was hunched, leaning heavily on a long stick. No, a cane. It was an old man. His clothing soaked, his hair white and plastered to his wrinkled face. The man was shouting, waving one arm, but the river roared too loudly for Eli to make out the words. He could see panic in the man's movements, the way his feet slipped close to the edge of the rising water. One wrong step and the current would take him. For a heartbeat, Eli hesitated. The river was treacherous even in calm weather, and today it looked almost alive, thrashing, foaming, clawing at its banks. He was small and underfed, no match for the power of that water. Logic told him to turn away, to go home before the storm made crossing impossible. But something inside him refused to move. The man on the other side looked helpless, trapped, and Eli knew that feeling all too well. Before his mind could talk him out of it, he dropped his bundle of wood and started down the slope. The rain began in earnest now, hard and cold, stinging his skin. The earth turned slick under his feet, and twice he nearly lost his balance. When he reached the riverbank, the noise was deafening. The water surged against rocks, whitecaps breaking in angry bursts. He scanned the bank until he spotted the narrow spot where the current seemed slightly calmer, just downstream from a cluster of willow trees. That was his only chance. He cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted across the river, "Hold on, I'm coming." The old man looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fear. He shook his head and motioned for Eli to stay back, but the boy didn't listen. He tore off his worn jacket and tossed it aside, then took one deep breath and stepped into the river. The shock hit him instantly. The water was like ice, stabbing through his thin clothes and stealing his breath. The current pushed hard against his legs, trying to sweep him off his feet. He dug his heels into the slippery rocks, inching forward one step at a time. The roar of the water filled his ears, drowning out everything else. His arms trembled as he reached for a half-submerged log to steady himself. It slipped under his grip, sending him stumbling sideways. Cold panic flared in his chest, but he forced it down. He couldn't stop now. He looked up and saw the old man watching him wide-eyed. The distance between them seemed endless.
"Just hold on,"
Eli shouted again, though his voice barely carried over the water. His teeth chattered, his skin burned with cold, and the river kept trying to knock him down. Every step was a battle. The mud sucked at his boots. The rocks cut into his feet when he stumbled. But he kept going, because there was something in that man's face. A helplessness that mirrored the way Eli himself had felt so many nights alone in his cabin. Halfway across, the current surged suddenly, nearly dragging him under. He went to his knees, his hands flailing for something to grab. His fingers brushed a branch and clung to it desperately. The water roared in his ears, pulling, tugging, threatening to take him. His lungs screamed for air, but he forced himself up again, sputtering, shaking, moving forward inch by inch. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. By the time he reached the far bank, his arms felt like lead. The old man reached out a trembling hand, and Eli grabbed it, using the last of his strength to pull them both onto the muddy shore. They collapsed there side by side, gasping. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain came down in sheets now, soaking everything. Eli rolled onto his back, blinking at the gray sky. His whole body ached, but he felt a strange sense of calm. He had done it. The old man turned his head toward Eli. His face was lined deeply, his skin weathered from years under the sun. His eyes, dark and steady, studied the boy in silence. Then in a low voice roughened by age, he said, "You're a brave one." His accent was soft but distinct. Native, Eli realized, from one of the tribes that lived deeper in the valley. Eli sat up slowly, brushing mud from his clothes. "You shouldn't be out here," he said between breaths. "The river's too dangerous." The man gave a small smile, more of a grimace. "I know, my foot slipped. I thought I could cross before the storm reached." He looked down at his leg, which was twisted slightly. But the river had other plans. Eli followed his gaze and saw the man's leg trembling. "You hurt?" The old man nodded. "A little, but I will live thanks to you." Eli stood and offered his hand again. "Come on. There's an old trail that leads through the woods. My cabin's not far. You can rest there until the rain stops." The man looked at him with surprise, then acceptance. He took Eli's hand, and together they stumbled toward the trees. The forest was thick, the rain muffled by the canopy overhead. Eli supported most of the man's weight as they moved, his thin frame straining under the effort. Every few steps the man winced but said nothing. When they reached the edge of the clearing where Eli's cabin stood, the old man paused. The cabin looked even smaller than usual, just a sagging roof, a chimney that leaned to one side, and a door held together by rope. But smoke still drifted faintly from the chimney, and the sight of it brought relief to Eli's chest. "Here," Eli said, helping him inside. The cabin was dim and smelled of wood smoke and damp clothes. He guided the man to the chair by the hearth and threw a few damp sticks into the small fireplace. It took several tries, but finally a thin flame flickered to life. The old man watched him quietly. "You live here alone?" he asked. Eli nodded, feeding the fire. "Since my father died. My ma too last winter." His voice was matter-of-fact, though a shadow crossed his face. "Ain't got anyone else?" The man's eyes softened. "Yet you helped a stranger," Eli shrugged. "Didn't seem right to leave you." He reached for an old blanket and wrapped it around the man's shoulders. "You hungry? I got some bread left." The old man accepted it with a nod, though he barely ate. He watched Eli move about the cabin, fussing with the fire and checking the shutters. "You are kind," he said after a moment. Most would have turned away. Eli sat down across from him, resting his arms on his knees. "Maybe, but I know what it feels like when no one comes." The man smiled faintly, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "The river tests many hearts," he murmured almost to himself. "And yours is strong." Eli didn't understand, but he didn't ask. He was too tired, too cold. The sound of the rain on the roof was steady now, almost gentle. For the first time in a long while, he felt something like peace. The old man dozed in the chair, and Eli sat watching the fire, the light flickering across the rough wooden walls. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that tiny cabin, two souls who had been alone for far too long found quiet shelter together. Eli didn't know yet that his life was about to change forever, that this act of simple kindness, this moment born out of instinct and courage, would set in motion a chain of events that would give him something he had never truly known before, a place to belong. But for now, as the river roared unseen in the distance and the wind howled against the hills, the boy simply closed his eyes and let the warmth of the fire wash over him, unaware that fate itself had just taken notice of him. The storm passed by morning, leaving the forest soaked and glistening in the pale light of dawn. Mist curled low over the ground, and the scent of wet pine hung thick in the air. Eli woke to the soft crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. His small cabin was dim, streaks of sunlight filtering through the gaps in the wooden slats. For a moment, he wasn't sure if last night had been real. The river, the old man, the struggle through the current. But then he saw the shape sitting quietly near the hearth. The elder was awake, his weathered hands clasped around a steaming cup that Eli had filled with the last of his boiled herbs. His eyes, dark and deep as the forest soil, followed the firelight as though reading something in it that Eli could not see. "You're awake," Eli said softly, rubbing his eyes. "I thought you might have left." The man shook his head slowly. "Your kindness anchored me here," he said in a low, gravelly tone. "A man should not leave without giving thanks to the one who saved his life." Eli looked embarrassed and shrugged, reaching for his coat. "You don't have to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. The man smiled, the lines on his face deepening. No, boy, not anyone. Eli busied himself with the fire, poking at the embers. He didn't know what to say. Compliments made him uncomfortable. He wasn't used to them. Most people in the nearby town barely noticed him, and when they did, it was usually to tell him to move along or to stay out of trouble. He had grown used to blending into the edges of things, silent, unseen, surviving quietly. But this man's gaze was different. It wasn't pitying or distant. It was as though he truly saw Eli, not just the ragged clothes or the dirt-streaked face, but the boy behind it. After a while, the man spoke again. You crossed a wild river to save an old crippled stranger. You could have died. Eli shrugged again, still not meeting his eyes. Didn't think about that. Bravery rarely thinks, the man said softly. It simply acts when the heart calls it. There was silence for a moment, broken only by the soft crackle of fire. Then the elder reached into the pouch at his side. His fingers moved with care, trembling slightly as he drew something out. A small pendant carved from a piece of dark wood, shaped like a hawk in mid-flight. The carving was intricate, its wings etched with delicate lines that shimmered faintly when they caught the light. He held it out to Eli. Take this. Eli looked at it uncertainly. What is it? A symbol of my people, the man said. The hawk sees what others cannot. It flies alone but belongs to the sky itself. You have that same spirit. Eli stared at the pendant, hesitant to take it. I can't, that looks important. It is, the elder said with a nod. That is why I give it to you. You have shown the heart of one who does not turn away. Our chief will want to meet you. Eli's brow furrowed. Your chief? The man's lips curved in a faint smile. I am of the Kiona people. Our village lies beyond the ridge where the forest meets the river again. Few outsiders walk our trails. But you will be welcome. Eli didn't answer right away. He had heard of the Kiona tribe. People in town spoke of them with wary respect, sometimes even fear. They were proud, private, and protective of their land. Outsiders rarely visited, and when they did, they didn't stay long. The thought of walking into their village alone made his stomach twist. I don't think they'd want me there, he said finally, shaking his head. He stopped himself. Just a poor orphan. Just nobody. The elder's gaze didn't waver. You are the one who crossed the river. That is enough. Eli turned the pendant over in his hands. It felt warm despite the chill in the room, as if it carried some hidden life within it. The carved hawk's eyes seemed to watch him, fierce and unblinking. If your chief really wants to meet me, he said slowly, then maybe I'll come by tomorrow. After I finish my chores, the old man nodded. Tomorrow, then. They shared a quiet meal of bread and berries that Eli had gathered earlier in the week. The old man ate slowly, as though savoring each bite. When he finished, he stood with Eli's help testing his leg. He could walk, though not without a limp. Before leaving, he turned back at the door. The morning light framed him in gold and mist. You have a good fire, Eli, he said softly. Keep it alive. It will lead you to places you cannot yet imagine. Then he was gone, disappearing into the trees like a shadow returning home. Eli stood by the door for a long time after, the pendant clenched in his hand. The forest outside was quiet except for the dripping of rain from the leaves. He didn't understand why the man's words stayed with him, echoing long after he had left. He had never been invited anywhere in his life, never been wanted anywhere, and now a whole tribe wanted to see him? It didn't make sense, but the thought tugged at him all day. As he went about his chores, chopping wood, gathering water, mending the leaks in his roof, he found himself glancing toward the direction of the forest ridge. The pendant hung around his neck now, hidden beneath his shirt, but he could feel it there, solid and strangely comforting, like it belonged to him. That night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, the moonlight painting pale lines across the floor. He imagined what the Kiona village might look like. Tents and fires glowing in the dark, drums echoing between the trees, faces turned toward him in welcome. It was a dream, he told himself. A foolish one. Still, something deep inside whispered that he should go. By morning, the decision was made. He packed a small bundle of food, tucked the pendant safely beneath his shirt, and set out toward the ridge. The forest was damp and cool, sunlight breaking through in shafts that lit up the moss and ferns. Birds called overhead, their songs clear and bright after the storm. The world felt fresh, renewed, as if something had been washed clean. The trail was steep and winding, and by the time Eli reached the top, his legs ached. He stopped to catch his breath and looked out over the valley. The river gleamed below, calm now, its rage spent. Beyond it, in the distance, smoke curled into the sky, the faint sign of a settlement. His heart thudded. That had to be it. He descended carefully, following faint signs along the way. A feather tied to a branch, a stone arranged in a circle, a trail of footprints that weren't his own. Each one reassured him that he was on the right path. The deeper he went, the quieter it grew. Even the birds seemed to watch in silence. Then, just as doubt began to creep in, he saw movement ahead. A young man stepped out from behind a tree, bow in hand. His expression was calm, though his eyes were sharp. Two more appeared behind him, silent and poised. Eli froze, his throat dry. I was told to come, he stammered. An old man by the river. He said your chief wanted to see me. The first man studied him for a moment, then nodded once. You are the river boy, Eli blinked. River boy? That is what we call the one who crossed the flood to save Elder Niska. The man's tone held respect. He told us you would come. Relief washed through Eli, though he didn't quite understand why they looked at him as if he were someone important. The men lowered their bows and gestured for him to follow. They led him through the trees, and soon the forest opened up to reveal a clearing that took his breath away. The village was alive with movement. People weaving baskets, tending fires, children chasing each other between the lodges. The smell of roasted fish and herbs filled the air. Everything seemed vibrant, peaceful, connected. As they entered, people turned to look at him. Conversations paused, eyes followed him, curious, appraising, but not hostile. Eli kept his gaze low, feeling suddenly very small and out of place. At the center of the village stood a great fire pit, surrounded by stones and decorated poles. Beside it stood Elder Niska, the man he had rescued, his cane in hand. When he saw Eli, his face broke into a smile. You came, he said warmly. The river boy keeps his word. Eli nodded awkwardly. You said the chief wanted to see me. The elder turned and gestured to a tall figure seated beside the fire. The man's hair was streaked with silver, his eyes deep and unreadable. He wore a robe trimmed with eagle feathers, and his presence commanded quiet without a word. The chief studied Eli for a long moment. Then he rose, stepping closer. This is the one? He asked. Yes, said Niska, the boy who faced the river. The chief's gaze lingered on the pendant at Eli's chest. You carry the hawk, he said. Few are given that symbol. It belongs only to those whose hearts walk with courage. Eli swallowed, unsure what to say. I didn't want him to drown. The chief smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes creasing. Courage rarely sees its own face, boy. You risked your life not for reward, but because it was right. He placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. That is a rare thing. Eli stood still, heat rising to his cheeks. Around them the villagers murmured softly, their eyes filled with respect. The chief continued, his voice carrying through the clearing. The hawk does not belong to one sky alone. It travels far, yet always finds its way home. This boy, this river boy, has shown the heart of the hawk. Let him walk among us as one of our own. Eli's breath caught. He looked from the chief to Elder Niska, who nodded with pride. The villagers murmured again, but this time the sound was warm, approving. Someone brought forward a small bowl of river clay mixed with ash. The chief dipped his fingers into it and drew a single mark across Eli's forehead, a symbol of belonging. Eli didn't know what to do or say. His mind raced, but all he felt was a quiet, swelling warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Belonging. As the villagers began to cheer softly, Niska leaned close to him and whispered, The river brought you to us for a reason. Eli, you crossed more than water yesterday. You crossed into a new life. And as the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the clearing, Eli felt the truth of those words settle deep in his heart. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he wasn't just surviving. He was becoming part of something greater, something that might finally, truly, feel like home. The fire at the center of the Kiona village burned bright that afternoon, its smoke rising into the blue sky like a gray ribbon. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and cooked maize. Eli sat near the flames, knees drawn to his chest, watching the people move around him. He still couldn't quite believe where he was, or that he had been invited here at all. Just days ago, he had been alone in his leaky cabin, scavenging scraps to survive. Now he sat in a circle among people who treated him not as a burden or a stranger, but as something else entirely, someone worth noticing. Children darted past, laughing, their hair shining like dark silk in the sunlight. Women stirred pots over the fire, humming soft tunes that rose and fell like the wind in the trees. Men worked on carving bows, repairing nets, or skinning the morning's catch by the river. There was harmony here, a rhythm to life that Eli had never known existed. Everyone seemed to move with purpose, each person a thread in a larger fabric. Elder Niska sat beside him, his cane resting across his knees. Though his leg was still stiff, his spirit seemed stronger than ever. "You're quiet, river boy," he said, smiling faintly. "Too quiet for someone who faced a storm and won." Eli glanced at him shyly. "Just watching. I've never seen a place like this before." Niska nodded. "You see what peace looks like. It comes when people live as one with the land and with each other." Eli looked around again, his eyes tracing the circle of lodges built from wood and hides, the carefully woven fences marking small gardens of herbs and corn. "You built all this?" Niska chuckled. "Not I, not alone. Many hands, many hearts. Each person adds their part, and together it becomes something lasting." He poked at the fire with his cane. "The world beyond these trees forgets that truth. Too many think a man can stand alone forever, but even the hawk needs the wind to fly." Eli thought of his lonely cabin, of nights spent staring at the ceiling, counting the sounds of rain. He had believed loneliness was simply the way life was meant to be. But sitting here, surrounded by warmth and laughter, he began to feel the ache of all those silent years. "Do you think," he began, hesitating, "do you think your people would really let me stay? I mean, I'm not one of you." Niska looked at him, eyes kind but serious. "Do you think the river asks where the rain comes from before it joins it? You are of the same water now. You crossed it with your heart, not your blood." Eli didn't know how to answer. He turned his gaze back to the flames, mesmerized by their dance. A group of children gathered nearby, whispering and pointing at him. One of them, a small girl with 2 long braids, approached timidly, holding something in her hands. "For you," she said, offering a piece of bread baked in the ashes. "Mama said to share." Eli blinked, taken aback. "Oh, thank you." He took it carefully. The bread was still warm, rough but rich with the scent of cornmeal. The girl smiled and ran off, giggling with her friends. Niska chuckled. "They're curious. You're the first outsider they've seen welcomed by the chief himself. It's not a small thing, Eli." The mention of the chief made Eli's stomach twist slightly. He still remembered the man's powerful presence, the quiet authority in his voice, the way everyone had fallen silent when he spoke. He hadn't known what to say when the chief declared him one of their own. He still didn't fully understand it. Why would they accept someone like him, a poor scrappy orphan from nowhere, so quickly? Later that day, as the sun began to lower, the chief called for a gathering. The people assembled around the fire pit, sitting in neat rows, their faces glowing in the amber light. Niska motioned for Eli to join him near the front. Eli hesitated, his heart pounding, but followed. The chief stood tall, his robe of feathers and leather swaying in the evening breeze. His voice carried easily, calm and deep. "The river tests all things," he said, looking around at his people. "It takes and it gives. Yesterday it took from us the strength of one of our elders, but the spirit of the river returned that strength through the courage of another." He gestured toward Eli. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Eli felt every eye turned to him. "This boy," the chief continued, "is not of our blood, yet he carries the heart of the hawk. He crossed the river without fear, guided by something greater than himself. Such a heart belongs to this land. From this day forward, he walks among us not as a stranger but as brother." The crowd responded with a low hum of approval. Niska placed a firm hand on Eli's shoulder, steadying him. The chief stepped forward and offered a small pouch filled with river clay and ash. He dipped his fingers into it and traced a mark over Eli's brow. A single curved line, the symbol of the hawk's flight. Eli stood frozen, unsure if he should bow or speak or simply breathe. He felt warmth bloom through his chest, deeper than any fire could give. The chief's eyes met his, full of calm pride. "Welcome home, Eli of the river," he said. A murmur of voices rose again, this time softer, filled with something Eli couldn't quite name, acceptance perhaps or hope. A few people came forward to greet him, offering handshakes or simple nods. Someone draped a woven shawl around his shoulders, the weight of it both humbling and comforting. That evening the village celebrated. Fires burned brighter, songs filled the air, and drums echoed like heartbeats through the clearing. Eli sat beside Niska again, his face flushed with the warmth of the flames and the strange, joyful energy that pulsed through the people. Children danced in a circle, their shadows leaping against the firelight. The chief sat nearby, speaking quietly with the other elders, occasionally glancing toward Eli with a knowing smile. A woman brought him a bowl of stew thick with vegetables and venison, the richest meal he'd had in months. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Niska teased gently. Eli laughed softly. "I just don't know what to do. I've never had people treat me like this before." "Then learn," Niska said simply. "Learn to accept kindness as easily as you give it. That too takes courage." Eli ate slowly, savoring each bite. Around him, laughter rose like music. The tribe's life was woven with joy, strength, and a sense of belonging that stirred something deep inside him. For the first time, he felt the heavy shell of loneliness start to crack. Later, as the stars spread across the sky, the chief rose once more. He carried a long wooden staff carved with symbols that seemed to tell stories Eli couldn't yet read. He struck the earth 3 times and the village fell silent. "The river boy has shown us what it means to act without hesitation," the chief said. "He faced the wild water and the fear that lives in every heart. But courage is not only for one day, it must live in all days." He looked at Eli, his gaze firm but kind. "You will stay among us, learn our ways, and walk our paths. The hawk sees far, but even it must learn where to land. Your journey begins here." Eli bowed his head slightly, unsure what words could possibly match the weight of what he felt. "I'll do my best," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. The chief nodded. "That is all any heart can promise." The night wore on, filled with stories and song. Niska told tales of the river spirits, of how they guarded the tribe and tested those who strayed too far. Each story carried a meaning hidden beneath its words, lessons about courage, respect, and balance. Eli listened with rapt attention, feeling as if each tale was a thread slowly weaving him deeper into the tribe's life. When the fire began to die down, he wandered to the edge of the clearing. The forest loomed beyond, dark and alive with the sounds of crickets and owls. He could still hear laughter behind him, see the faint glow of firelight flickering through the trees. For once, the darkness didn't feel empty. Niska joined him, leaning on his cane. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" Eli nodded. "Yeah, like I'm dreaming. I keep thinking I'll wake up back in my cabin." The elder smiled faintly. "Dreams are only truth waiting to be believed. You have been given a place among us. But what comes next is your choice." "Well, what do you mean?" "The hawk you wear," Niska said, touching the pendant around Eli's neck. "It's not just a gift. It's a promise. You saved a life, yes, but the river didn't choose you for that alone. It saw something in you that even you do not yet see. You'll come to understand in time." Eli looked down at the pendant. The carved wings caught the moonlight, and for a moment it almost seemed to shimmer with life. He didn't understand what Niska meant, but he felt the truth of it. Something had changed in him the moment he crossed that river, something that went deeper than courage or instinct. It was as if the river had washed away not just fear, but the walls he had built around himself. They stood together for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees. Finally, Niska turned to him. "Tomorrow you will begin learning our ways, the songs, the language, the hunt. You will not be treated as a guest, Eli. You are one of us now. That means responsibility." Eli nodded solemnly. "I'll learn. I promise." Niska smiled, the firelight flickering in his eyes. Then the river chose well. As the night deepened, the village slowly quieted. The fires burned low. The drums faded into the soft rhythm of the forest. Eli lay down in a small tent they had prepared for him near Niska's lodge. He pulled the woven blanket over himself, feeling its warmth seep into his bones. Outside, the world whispered with life. The rustle of leaves, the call of distant wolves, the murmur of the river that had once tried to take him. But instead of fear, he felt only peace. He touched the pendant at his chest and smiled faintly in the dark. For the first time since he could remember, he wasn't wishing for a home. He had found one. And though he didn't yet know it, this night was only the beginning of a journey that would test him in ways he could never imagine, where his heart, his courage, and his very soul would be shaped by the people who now called him brother. But for now, As the stars wheeled silently above the treetops, Eli drifted to sleep with the sound of the river echoing softly in his dreams, no longer as something to fear, but as something that had carried him exactly where he was meant to be.